Jandek is the musical project of Corwood Industries, a record label operating out of Houston, Texas. Since 1978, Jandek/Corwood Industries has independently released over 100 albums/DVDs of unusual, often emotionally dissolute folk and blues songs without ever granting more than the occasional interview or providing any biographical information. Jandek recordings have varied widely in style but are most commonly associated with a highly idiosyncratic and frequently atonal form of folk and blues music, often using an open and unconventional chord structure. Jandek's music is unique, but the lyrics closely mirror the country blues and folk traditions of East Texas. The name Jandek is intended to refer specifically to the musical project and not an individual, though Jandek is widely believed to be the brainchild of the enigmatic Sterling Smith, who closely guards his privacy. Only a handful of people claim to have successfully contacted Jandek before he began regularly playing in public in 2004. See below. He releases albums through his own record label Corwood Industries, keeping a Houston post office box so fans can write to Corwood for a typewritten catalog and order Jandek's albums, usually at low prices. Many of his albums feature photos of a Caucasian man at various ages. Although it seemed likely that this man was the principal performer, this presumption was not certain until his live debut in 2004. Jandek now often performs live with other musicians, but these collaborations remain the extent of his engagement with the public. It was widely accepted that Jandek's real name is Sterling R. Smith, probably born October 26, 1945. A review of the debut album Ready for the House, 1978, in OP magazine, the first ever national press given to Jandek, referred to the artist as Sterling Smith. Smith has kept his personal history an almost absolute secret, revealing only one story about his pre-Corwood years. He wrote 7 novels but burned them upon rejection from New York publishers. Aside from that anecdote, virtually nothing is known about his life. He was rumored to have grown up, or at least spent time, in Providence, Rhode Island. A handful of early Jandek songs mention either the state itself or the Rhode Island town of Point Judith. It has also been suggested that he is well-traveled, as several album sleeves depict locations that have been formally identified as being outside the United States. This hypothesis, however, presumes that all pictures that do not depict Smith were taken by him. In one of his 3 unauthorized interviews, unknowingly given in 1985 to John Truvey for Spin magazine, Jandek mentioned that he was working at that time as a machinist. Jandek's first album, Ready for the House, though obviously a solo work, was originally credited to a band called The Units. As explained in an interview in the first issue of Spin, Smith was forced to change the name The Units by an identically named Californian group already in possession of a trademark on the name, after Scott Reiser from The Units wrote Smith a letter with documentation. All reissues of this first album and all subsequent Corwood releases have been credited to Jandek. In Truvey's interview, Smith claims he came up with the name Jandek while on the telephone with a person named Decker during the month of January. Smith's initial use of a plural band name, and Corwood's curious tendency to refer to as a representative from Corwood Industries, has led some fans to suggest that the reclusive artist intended his oeuvre to be perceived as the work of an anonymous collective rather than that of a single man. Indeed, though roughly 2/3 of his records are solo affairs, the other third have variably featured female vocalists, different male vocalists, bass guitar, electric guitar, drums, and accordion. These contributions are usually credited to outside collaborators, but in the Spin interview as well as a letter to DJ Erwin Chusev, the artist admitted to having overdubbed parts himself on occasion, such as on the album The Rocks Crumble. No proper credits list has ever appeared on an album, but song titles have included Nancy Sings and John Plays Drums, though those pieces are 2 different versions of the same song. One early theory suggested that all the music was recorded in a single, feverish, possibly manic phase and that after 19 albums the releases would stop. This appeared, at the time, as if it might have some validity. The 21st album, Lost Cause, finished with a sidelong piece called The Electric End, a crazed instrumental featuring shouted vocals, electric guitar, and microphone feedback. Instead, this seems to have marked the end of the first band phase. Then the 22nd album arrived and returned to the acoustic and vocal sound that is found on most of the first 6 Corwood albums, often referred to as the first acoustic phase. This continued unabated for 7 albums until, in 1999, The Beginning was released, which ended with a 15-minute-long work of instrumental piano. This ushered in the most controversial period of albums in Corwood's history, 3 albums of unaccompanied voice. seemingly recorded on a voice-activated tape recorder. These spoken-word songs ran up to half an hour in length and taxed even the most devoted followers. After these albums, though, the direction changed again and Jandek returned to a voice and guitar mixture with occasional harmonica, though the approach was different than the earlier recordings. The guitar was often electric and the voice was decidedly older than that on the previous albums. Further albums have continued the solo approach, though the instrument used has occasionally been a fretless bass, and the songs have stretched progressively longer and the lyrics have become even more personal. Though Corwood still releases albums like this, the most recent is What Was Out There Disappeared. They are now alternated with releases of the live band shows, which are remarkably different and feature unusually tight playing. Some of Jandek's allure stems from his small but devoted fan base, which includes Sonic Youth, Bill Callahan, Mike Watt, John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats, Load, Ben Gibbard of Death Cab for Cutie and the Postal Service, Matt Cameron of Pearl Jam, Bright Eyes, and K Records founder Calvin Johnson. In his review of Follow Your Footsteps, 1986, for AllMusic, guitarist and critic Eugene Chadbourne wrote that perhaps the real artistic excitement is not knowing what will happen each time Jandek turns on his tape recorder or presses a record, since the results can run the range from a masterpiece to utter garbage. In the 1980s and 1990s, most fans stumbled into the world of Jandek after hearing his music on college radio or freeform stations like WFMU and WCBN-FM. But as the 21st century approached, Jandek was just as likely to catch fans through the internet. An unofficial Jandek website was founded by Seth Tasu in 1997. It includes complete descriptions of each album and concert in the archives of the Jandek discussion list. Jandek unknowingly gave 2 unauthorized phone interviews in his entire career, the first conducted by fellow outsider artist John Truby, for the aforementioned Spin article in 1985. In it, he admitted to having had musical training earlier in life, and refuted an OP magazine reviewer praising Mate he never tune his guitar, by stating that he did indeed tune his guitar, albeit usually to open tunings of his own devising. The Spin article was Jandek's first major press. As the 80s drew to a close, the magazine proclaimed him to be one of the most important artists of the 1980s in a special end-of-decade issue. Outsider music expert Erwin Chusid conducted the second interview and brought quite a bit of attention to Jandek by including an account of his own dealings with Corwood Industries in his book Songs in the Key of Z, The Curious World of Outsider Music. The accompanying album featuring a track from Ready for the House after Jandek called him in response to Chusid's request for information. Texas Monthly reporter Katie Vine tracked down the Corwood representative and gave an account of her experiences in the August 1999 issue. At Jandek's request, Vine kept his name and address a secret. In 2004, Unicorn Stencil Productions released the first documentary on Jandek, entitled Jandek on Corwood. It was directed by Chad Friedrichs and produced by Friedrichs and Paul Feller. Amongst the extras on the DVD release of the documentary is the entire unedited tape of the John Truby conducted Spin interview. No one from Corwood Industries is represented on screen, but the label did suggest several people to be interviewed for the movie, including music critics Phil Milstein and Gary Pig Gold, and Katie Vine. Corwood's recommendation of Vine for the documentary is seen as essentially endorsing the contents and confirming the authenticity of the Texas Monthly interview. In October of the same year, Jandek stunned the alternative music scene by playing live for what was probably the first time. See live performances section below for details. In September 2006, author Danon Job announced the completion and publication of the first part of his Corwood-sanctioned novel Niagara Blues, released through Scottish publisher Single Cell Press. The book, representing Job's imagination of a possible biography of the artist, is almost entirely fictional. Its protagonist shares with Jandek only his stage name, song catalog, and a few other facts. British publishers Have Cut Publications announced they would be releasing the complete version of the book in July 2011. There have been a handful of live shows each year since 2004, and Corwood intends to release all of them on CD in addition to its studio albums. In fact, Corwood puts out more Jandek releases now than ever in its history, releasing 5 albums in 2005 alone. Summer 2006 saw the release of the first Corwood DVD, a video version of Glasgow Sunday, Jandek's first live performance. Duality of Self, a record of Jandek's performance in Toronto in September 2006, was premiered at the SXSW Music Festival and Film Festival in March 2007. Produced by Callan Brunton, Jim Morrow, Gary Topp, and the representative from Corwood, the 2-hour concert film was directed by Brunton and editor Ryan Noth, using a 5-camera setup. Kuchen, a one-act play featuring Jandek, the representative in Sheila Smith, aired on a PBS program called Hardly Sound in November 2014. It was filmed live in August 2014. This is the discography of Corwood Industries. The record company releases only albums by Jandek.